It is not a coincidence that this question reached you. And it is not a coincidence that it asks you to stop thinking before you answer. Because the moment you analyze, compare, or try to be right, you move away from what this experience is designed to reveal. So for a brief moment, don't think. In front of you, imagine ravens, not as birds in nature documentaries, not as symbols yet, simply ravens, still, observant, watching from a distance, silent, but intensely aware. Notice which raven draws your attention first. Do not justify it. Do not explain it. Do not look for meaning yet. The first pull matters more than any interpretation that comes later. Ravens have always occupied a strange place in the human psyche. They appear in myths, dreams, and ancient stories not as gentle guides but as witnesses. They stand at the edge of things, between light and darkness, life and death, order and chaos. They see what others avoid seeing. This is why the raven is inseparable from what Carl Jung called the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is not darkness in a moral sense. It is everything within you that was pushed aside, ignored, judged, or hidden in order for you to be accepted, loved, or safe. Traits you learned were too much, not enough, inappropriate, dangerous, or unwanted. The raven does not judge these parts, it observes them. And when a raven draws your attention, it is often because something unacknowledged inside you is asking to be seen. The conscious mind prefers clarity. It wants clean stories and acceptable identities. But the unconscious does not speak in explanations. It speaks in images, sensations, and emotional reactions that arise before thought intervenes. That is why this works. You are not choosing a raven. You are noticing which aspect of your shadow is closest to the surface right now. As you look, you may feel curiosity, unease, familiarity, or resistance. You might feel drawn and uncomfortable at the same time. This tension is important. Jung pointed out that what disturbs us in others often reveals something unintegrated within ourselves. The raven often appears where there is truth without decoration. It represents insight that does not ask permission, awareness that does not soften itself to be pleasant. A part of you that sees through illusions, including the illusions you hold about yourself. Many people spend years trying to be positive, move on, or fix themselves without realizing that what they are avoiding is not weakness, but power. The shadow often contains vitality, intensity, creativity, ambition, anger, independence, energies that were never allowed full expression. When these forces are ignored, they do not disappear. They act from behind the scenes. This is why shadow work matters, not to become darker, but to become whole. Before we go further, stay with the image of the raven you noticed. Let it remain exactly as it is. Do not rush ahead. Meaning unfolds slowly when resistance relaxes, and if you feel the impulse to acknowledge what you're experiencing, leave a comment with this simple sentence. I noticed the raven before I judged it, not as a label, as a recognition. And if you want to continue exploring the deeper layers of the psyche, not to condemn the shadow, but to understand it, subscribe and stay with us. In the next part, we will explore how the shadow forms, why it gains power when ignored, and what the raven reveals about the parts of you that no longer want to remain hidden. For now, let the raven watch and allow yourself to be seen. If you stay with the image long enough, the raven begins to feel less like a symbol and more like a presence. It does not demand attention. It does not move dramatically. It simply remains watching. This is precisely how the shadow works in the psyche. Carl Jung explained that the shadow is formed early, not because something is wrong with you, but because adaptation is necessary. As a child, you learn what brings approval and what brings rejection, what earns love and what creates distance. Slowly, without realizing it, you begin to edit yourself. Certain emotions are encouraged, others are discouraged. Certain traits are rewarded, others are punished or ignored. What does not fit is not destroyed. It is pushed down. This is how the shadow is born. The raven represents this hidden accumulation. It carries what was not allowed to be expressed openly. Anger that had no place to go, sensitivity that felt unsafe, ambition that seemed threatening, curiosity that asked the wrong questions. independence that challenged authority. None of these qualities are inherently negative, but when they are denied expression, they do not disappear. They wait. The unconscious does not forget. If the raven that drew your attention felt heavy, distant, or unsettling, this may reflect a part of you that has been carrying unexpressed truth for a long time, a truth you learned to silence in order to belong. Jung warned that what is rejected inwardly is often projected outwardly. We see in others what we cannot yet tolerate in ourselves. We judge, admire, resent, or feel irrationally triggered by certain people without understanding why. The raven often appears at the moment when projection begins to break down. You may recognize this in your own life, strong emotional reactions that feel disproportionate. People who irritate you without clear reason, individuals you admire intensely yet feel threatened by. These reactions are not accidents, they are mirrors. The shadow does not want to destroy you. It wants to be acknowledged. And this is where many people misunderstand shadow work. They believe it means indulging destructive impulses or becoming darker. Jung was very clear. Integration does not mean acting out the shadow. It means becoming conscious of it. Awareness changes everything. When a trait is unconscious, it controls you. When it becomes conscious, it becomes a choice. The raven symbolizes this transition, from blind influence to conscious relationship. If the raven you chose felt intelligent, sharp, almost piercing in its gaze, this may indicate a shadow connected to perception and truth. You see things others avoid seeing. You notice inconsistencies, contradictions, unspoken dynamics. But perhaps you learned that speaking these truths brought consequences, conflict, rejection, isolation. So you learned to observe silently. This silence is not weakness, it is adaptation. But when carried too long, it becomes a burden. Truth held without expression turns inward and manifests as tension, cynicism, or emotional distance. Jung believed that the shadow often contains our unrealized potential. The very qualities we were told to suppress are often the ones that would bring vitality, creativity, and strength into our lives if integrated consciously. The raven does not soften its vision to be accepted. It sees what is there, and when this energy is denied, it does not vanish. It expresses itself indirectly, through sarcasm, withdrawal, sudden outbursts, or self-sabotage. This is why ignoring the shadow gives it more power, not less. As you reflect, notice where in your life you may be reacting rather than responding, where emotions seem to take over without warning, where patterns repeat despite your best intentions. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of something unseen asking for recognition. The raven appears when awareness is ready to face what was hidden. If this resonates, leave a comment with this simple sentence: I'm noticing what I usually avoid, not as a confession, as an act of awareness. And if you want to continue exploring the psyche at this deeper level, not to judge yourself but to understand what has been shaping you quietly, subscribe and stay with us. In the next part, we will explore how the shadow influences identity, relationships, and self-image, and what happens when the raven no longer needs to remain in the dark. For now, let the raven stay where it is, seeing, without accusation. At a certain point, the raven no longer feels distant. It no longer watches from the outside. It feels closer, almost internal, as if its gaze is now looking through you rather than at you. This is the moment when the shadow stops being an abstract idea and begins to touch identity itself. Carl Jung explained that the shadow does not exist separately from the personality. It grows alongside it. Every identity you build also creates a border, and everything that does not fit inside that border falls into the shadow. Over time, this division becomes so familiar that you forget it was ever constructed. You begin to say, "This is who I am," without realizing how much effort it takes to maintain that image. The raven appears when that effort becomes noticeable. If the raven that chose you felt intelligent, distant, or emotionally charged, it may reflect a part of you that has learned to stay on the edge of situations rather than fully inside them. Watching before participating, evaluating before trusting, protecting yourself by not revealing too much. This posture often develops in relationships. You may notice that you understand people deeply, yet feel misunderstood yourself, that you sense emotional undercurrents quickly, yet hesitate to expose your own. That intimacy feels both desired and threatening. This contradiction is not a flaw. It is a sign of a shadow formed around vulnerability. Jung warned that unintegrated shadow material does not remain passive. It shapes how we relate to others. We may attract relationships that replay old dynamics. We may feel drawn to people who express traits we deny in ourselves. Or we may feel inexplicably repelled by those same traits when they appear too close for comfort. The raven often reveals itself in these moments. Strong emotional reactions rarely point outward. They point inward. If you find yourself repeatedly triggered by certain behaviors, arrogance, weakness, dependence, emotional intensity, ambition, ask yourself gently where these qualities live in you, unseen or unaccepted. The shadow does not only contain what we fear, it also contains what we admire but feel unable to claim. This is why Jung insisted that shadow integration is not optional for psychological maturity. Without it, the personality becomes one-sided. Polished on the surface but fragile underneath, the raven symbolizes the intelligence that sees both sides. It understands that light without shadow becomes blinding, that goodness without honesty becomes performance, that self-image without self-awareness becomes rigidity. As the shadow presses closer to consciousness, many people experience discomfort, shame, confusion, resistance. This is natural. You are encountering parts of yourself that were never given language, permission, or context. But this discomfort is not punishment. It is expansion. The psyche resists fragmentation, it seeks wholeness. Jung believed that much of anxiety and inner conflict comes not from external pressure, but from internal division. Parts of the self pulling in opposite directions, fighting for expression. The raven does not take sides. It observes the conflict until awareness is ready to hold it. If the raven that drew you in felt heavy or intense, it may signal a shadow connected to power. Ambition you learned to suppress. Anger you were told was unacceptable. Authority you were discouraged from claiming. These forces, when denied, often return as self-sabotage or resentment. Power rejected inwardly often appears outwardly as fear of powerful people or situations. The raven does not ask you to act these impulses out blindly. It asks you to see them clearly, to recognize their presence without moralizing them. Awareness creates distance. Distance creates choice. As you listen, notice whether any memories, relationships, or patterns quietly surface. Do not analyze them yet. Simply notice. The unconscious communicates in associations, not arguments. If something in this reflection resonates, leave a comment with this simple sentence: I'm beginning to see what was hidden. Not as a conclusion, as a beginning. And if you want to continue this journey into psychological depth, not to fix yourself, but to integrate what has been divided, subscribe and stay with us. In the final part, we will explore what happens when the shadow is no longer feared, how integration dissolves inner conflict, and why the raven ultimately becomes a guide rather than a threat. For now, let the raven remain close, not to judge, but to illuminate. At this stage, the raven no longer feels like something external. It does not feel like an image you selected or a symbol you analyzed. It feels closer than that, almost intimate, as if it has always been there, waiting for the moment when you were finally willing to look without turning away. This is where the real meaning of the shadow becomes clear. Carl Jung never described the shadow as something to be defeated or eliminated. He described it as something to be integrated, because the shadow is not what is wrong with you. It is what was left behind when you were trying to survive. The raven carries those abandoned parts. It carries the anger that had no safe outlet, the confidence that was labeled arrogance, the sensitivity that felt dangerous, the ambition that threatened belonging, the independence that challenged approval. None of these qualities disappeared. They simply went underground, and what remains unconscious does not remain inactive. Jung warned that the greatest danger is not the shadow itself, but our refusal to acknowledge it. What we refuse to see within ourselves inevitably appears outside us, as fate, as conflict, as repeated patterns we don't understand. This is why so many people feel haunted by the same situations, the same relationships, the same emotional reactions, again and again. The raven appears when repetition has done its work, when avoidance is no longer effective, when self-control is no longer enough, when the psyche demands honesty. Integration begins not with action but with recognition, with the simple but difficult act of saying, "This too belongs to me," not approving it, not indulging it, but acknowledging its existence. When a part of you is seen, it no longer needs to scream. This is why awareness changes everything. The moment a shadow aspect becomes conscious, it stops operating autonomously. You gain distance, and with distance comes choice. Anger no longer explodes without warning. Power no longer turns inward as sabotage. Sensitivity no longer hides as withdrawal. The raven does not disappear at this point. It changes its role. It stops being a threat and becomes a guide. Jung believed that psychological maturity does not come from identifying only with our strengths, but from holding opposites without collapsing into either. Light and dark, control and impulse, strength and vulnerability. The integrated person is not perfect, but they are whole. This wholeness brings something subtle but profound: relief. You no longer have to spend energy maintaining a flawless self-image. You no longer need to pretend certain feelings don't exist. You no longer have to fear parts of yourself as if they were enemies waiting to sabotage you. They become signals instead. When anger appears, it points to a boundary. When envy appears, it points to unclaimed desire. When fear appears, it points to meaning. The raven teaches you to listen to these signals rather than suppress them. At this point, the original question dissolves. It is no longer, which raven did you choose? The deeper question becomes, what part of myself am I finally willing to see? This is not a comfortable question, but it is a liberating one, because when the shadow is integrated, something remarkable happens. Energy returns, creativity increases, relationships become more honest. Inner conflict softens, not because life becomes easier, but because you are no longer fighting yourself. Jung called this process individuation, not becoming someone new, but becoming more fully who you already are, without fragmentation. The raven remains present here, not as darkness, but as depth, as intelligence that can tolerate truth without distortion, as awareness that no longer needs illusion to feel safe. If you have stayed until this moment, pause briefly. Notice what surfaced during this experience, not intellectually, emotionally. What felt uncomfortable? What felt familiar? What felt strangely relieving? If you feel the impulse to name it, leave a comment with this simple sentence: I'm ready to see what I avoided, not as a promise, as an acknowledgement. And if you want to continue exploring the psyche with honesty rather than fear, subscribe and stay with us. This space is not about quick answers or surface positivity. It is about depth, integration, and psychological truth. Because when you stop running from the shadow, it stops chasing you. And when you allow the raven to be seen, it no longer watches from the dark. It walks with you. That is where inner conflict ends and wholeness begins.